Today is 21st March 2018. We are in Athens, Georgia. My name is Kidula, and we have a guest here. Please, can you say your names?
My name is Jacqueline Cogdell DjeDje.
Are those your only names?
Well, there is another middle name, Jacqueline Dolores Cogdell, and then when I married, I became JJ.
Where do you currently live?
I currently live in Los Angeles, California.
How long have you lived there?
Off and on, since 1970. I arrived in Los Angeles when I began graduate school at UCLA, the Department of Music in 1970. I left in 72 to go to Ghana and other parts of West Africa to conduct field work. And I was away for 2 years. I came back to Los Angeles in 1974, stayed there for 1 year, taking exams, preparing to defend my dissertation. I didn't complete the dissertation, but I left and I went to Tuskegee University in 1975. I remained there until 1979 when I began teaching at UCLA in 1979. So Los Angeles has been my permanent address since 1979.
That's amazing. You talked like you do research. What occupation have you had living in Los Angeles?
Well, since 1970, I consider myself to be an ethnomusicologist. My great aspiration when I went into academe or when I had my educational training was to become a concert pianist, to learn how to play the music of Bach and Beethoven and Brahms, and I was good at that. I used to perform recitals and all of that, and I won competitions. But then during my junior or senior year at Fisk University, I was introduced to Darius Tima, who was a ethnomusicologist who conducted research in Nigeria. So during that time in the 1960s and I guess schools around the country, especially schools that had Black presence, whether they were historically Black or either historically white, they wanted something that had to do with the African diaspora. So that's when Fisk hired Darius Tima. And interestingly, Darius Tima is white, but he was the authority on African music. And he came and he taught courses on music of the African diaspora and music of Africa. Perhaps one of the first times schools like that were offering those kind of courses. So when he offered those and I became interested and realized the legitimacy of perhaps studying music of people who look like me, that is people with Black and dark skin, I asked, where can you do this? And he mentioned UCLA. So that's when I decided to go to UCLA.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I want to come back to UCLA later, but I want to go back a little bit before you got to Fisk University. Where had you been? Where were you born?
I was born in Jessup, Georgia, which is in southeast Georgia, born and raised there. And then I went to private school at Boggs Academy in Keysville, Georgia, Burke County, near Augusta. It's sort of interesting when I think about this because I always tell my family they sent me away. It's not that I wanted to go away. They sent me away to Boggs. My piano teacher in the Jessup area who was from Ware County, which is Waycross, Georgia, maybe about 30 or 40 miles away from Jessup. She had been teaching me piano since I was about 5 or 6. Her name is Suzanne McDaniel, and she was I don't know how she received her training, but she was well versed in playing so-called classical music, but she was also an outstanding gospel musician. So she was coming to Jessup not to play gospel or direct the choir at my church, being a union. She was going to another church. But because she had background in classical music, my dad, after he bought me a piano and all of that, he said, well, will you teach Jackie piano? And she said, well, I don't think I can afford to come and just teach one person. If you can arrange to have a group of people who are interested in learning piano, perhaps I will do it. I will come twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. Tuesdays, she would just come and teach us. On Fridays, she would combine that with her work with the choir. So my dad was able to recruit several people, young people, and she pretty much did that until I was about 12 or 13. And then that's when she began to say, I can't teach her anything else. She's learned too much. She's becoming more advanced than me. You need to send her someplace else. That's when he began to, I suppose, maybe investigate around in our area where he might send me. And he learned about bogs. And I think he learned about bogs because one of his classmates was the superintendent of Boggs. Boggs was a Presbyterian school. My dad had gone to, what's the name of this school in North Carolina? It's a historically black school that I can't remember. It'll come to me. I have senioritis here. It's not coming to me. But anyway, he was a classmate of this particular person, and his name is Stillman. I remember his name, but I can't remember. Johnson C. Smith. Johnson C. Smith is a historically black school in North Carolina. So my dad had graduated from there, and he learned that Johnson C. Smith had at least 2 graduates who were at Boggs. Stillman, who was the superintendent, and Mr. Francis, Charles Francis. He'd graduated, and he was the music person. So it was just a wonderful sort of setup. And my family and I took a trip to Boggs, which is about 150 miles away from Jessup. We visited that, and my dad saw the facilities and saw the great amount of interest they put on music, especially sort of art music, and people there were trained. So that's when he thought that would be the perfect place for me. And it probably was, because that was the turning point. That was the turning point in my life, going to Boggs. Boggs was, even though it was not historically black, it was founded in 1936 by the church.
What church?
Presbyterian,
okay.
Presbyterian church. And most of the students were black, but they were from Africa, and there were some from other parts of the African diaspora. All of the faculty were white. So this was my first time being sort of in a setting. I shouldn't say all of them, but the majority, quite a few of the faculty at Boggs were white, because all of these were church people, missionaries, and all of these sort of things. So it was in that setting that I was sort of introduced to a larger world of, diversity in that particular setting. Because in Jessup, in Wayne County, it was during, the 60s, 50s, 60s, at segregation. We were separated. The twain just did not meet. We were separate schools, separate churches, separate this. You go to the doctor's office, blacks go in the side door, the back, the whites go in the front. You go to the movie theaters, black go upstairs, white go there. So everything was really separate. You didn't really come into contact with each other too much. So going to Boggs allowed me to come in contact with all of these other people, other black people who were not from the United States. And the other thing about Boggs, it also attracted blacks from other parts of the country. You had blacks who came, young people from Chicago, young people from New York area. So basically the East Coast. It was also a setting that was sort of self-sufficient. We were in the middle of nowhere. Boggs is in the middle of nowhere in Keysville, Georgia, and it was and I suppose it was intentionally done like that because everything that we ate was always self-sufficient. The boys had to work on the farm. Can you imagine someone from New York City, these young boys having to come work on the farm, milk the cows, and they were in the farm. They really want us to be, a part of the earth in some way. And the young females, we were cooks, and we were also waitresses. So we waited on tables, and we did all of this. So even though we were in this private school, it was not necessarily an elitist place that placed us there. So we were separate, but we also learned to value, things that are sort of important, basic things about how to make a bed and all of these things that are sort of practical in our lives. So that was a turning point. But in addition to those practical things, I had an exceptional teacher, piano teacher. Her name was Celeste Gadsden, and she took me to another level in terms of playing the piano. And I used to compete in competitions in that area and won competitions at the regional level and at the state level. I went to Atlanta and I competed in this competition and I won second place. So she did well. She did well.
What are the competitions?
These are piano competitions, playing classical music.
So was any student from anywhere, or was it segregated for white people versus for black people?
I think it was all black. It was sort of a state competition because everything was still segregated during that time. This was I was at Boggs from about 63 to 66 when I was in 10th grade through 12th grade. And then, so it was all segregated, but at the state level, competing with other people.
You did well.
Yeah, I was good. Good for those people. I was good. So that's why I had this aspiration to become a concert pianist. Natalie Henderas, she's a black person who's a well-known, established concert pianist during that time. So that was in my mind of what I was going to do. And after I left Boggs for that, I guess the question was, what was I going to do when I leave Boggs? Was I going to go to a conservatory, or was I going to go to a regular sort of liberal arts school where I could perhaps learn more things in music? And I think at that point in time, Fisk was really the only choice, especially for black kids, that you could go to. And I think Boggs also helped for that because Boggs had this wonderful choir that was very much in the vein of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And so I was the accompanist for the choir. And we used to travel around Georgia. We used to travel in South Carolina and those places, singing those sort of those spirituals, those arranged spirituals that John W. Work and Dawson and all of those people had arranged. So I think I applied to Fisk. I'm not sure if I applied to any place else, maybe Howard, but Fisk is where I decided to go. But before I went to Fisk, my teachers arranged for me, and I don't remember how this happened, but there was a special institute at Hampton Institute, sort of a 6-week program for students to learn about music. This is sort of significant primarily because what we learn at Hampton, what I learned at Hampton, helped me when I arrived at UCLA. One of the things that we did at Hampton was to prepare an opera called Dido and Aeneas.
I did that one too in high school.
Purnell, what's his name?
Purcell.
Purcell.
Yeah.
Purcell. So we learned this extremely well, very much so. And then I remember when I had to take these classes, not classes, but these exams at UCLA. At that time, in order to enter UCLA, you had to take these placement exams. If you didn't pass all of the exams, it didn't mean you were not admitted. It's just that you had to go back and take them again. And for ethnomusicologists, regardless of what you were, you had to take Western music history and form and analysis and all of this stuff.
I did that too.
You did? Okay. Well, at UCLA, and I remember I was able to pass the form and analysis because they had Dido. Otherwise, I would not, because I didn't study anything about that at Fisk.
Yeah.
Okay.
So was that the only instrument you played at Boggs?
Yes.
The piano?
The piano.
You played no other instrument?
When I was in high school,
Yeah.
and not high school, but when I was in junior high school at Wayne County Training School in Jessup, I played saxophone. Not saxophone, but clarinet. Clarinet.
But you didn't continue with it?
No, I didn't continue with it. I stopped when I entered Boggs.
They didn't have a marching band?
No, we didn't have a marching band. We were doing too much other sort of things, a marching band. It was just a choir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.